In the early hours before dawn, while Caracas was still wrapped in darkness, a political shockwave quietly began to travel around the world. By sunrise, Washington confirmed what many believed impossible only days earlier. Nicolás Maduro, Venezuela's sitting president, and his wife, Cilia Flores, were in U.S. custody en route to New York to face federal charges related to narcotics trafficking and terrorism. The announcement landed with the weight of history. For an entire generation, the image of a captured head of state immediately revived memories of Saddam Hussein, pulled from a subterranean hideout near Tikrit in December 2003. Yet while the symbolism felt familiar, the method and the global implications marked a profound departure from the past. This was not a war. There were no televised bombardments, no invasion force rolling across borders, no shock and awe. Instead, the operation was described as a tightly executed law enforcement action, swift, surgical, and deliberately framed as judicial rather than military. That distinction, supporters argue, is what makes this moment unprecedented and deeply unsettling. A new model of regime change. When U.S. forces captured Saddam Hussein, the event came after months of full-scale war that devastated Iraq, dismantled its institutions, and cost tens of thousands of lives. The capture was the culmination of invasion and occupation. Maduro's arrest followed a radically different script. According to U.S. officials, special operations units entered Caracas under extreme secrecy, targeting what they described as a secure location used by the Venezuelan leader. Within hours, the mission was complete. No occupation followed. No regime-wide military campaign unfolded. The operation was presented not as regime change, but as the execution of long-standing criminal indictments. In Washington's telling, this was justice finally catching up, not empire expanding outward. Yet critics note that changing the language of intervention does not necessarily change its substance. Whether delivered by tanks or tactical teams, the removal of a foreign head of state without international authorization challenges long-standing norms of sovereignty. Criminalizing leadership. The legal framing of the Maduro operation signals a strategic evolution in how power is projected. Rather than portraying him primarily as an illegitimate ruler or political adversary, U.S. authorities recast Maduro as the leader of a transnational criminal enterprise, an alleged narco-terrorist rather than a sovereign head of state. This approach has far-reaching consequences. If a sitting president can be apprehended abroad under domestic criminal law, the line separating international justice from unilateral enforcement begins to blur. The precedent raises uncomfortable questions. Who determines when a leader crosses from political wrongdoing into criminal liability? Which courts have jurisdiction? And what protections remain for smaller states when powerful nations claim the authority to act as global prosecutors? After 1945, international law was designed to limit precisely this kind of unilateral action. Institutions like the International Criminal Court were created to provide collective legitimacy, not selective enforcement. Bypassing them risks hollowing out the very framework meant to restrain power. Echoes of 2003, with key differences. The comparison to Saddam Hussein is unavoidable, but it is the contrasts, not the parallels, that give this moment its true historical weight. Saddam was captured only after his government had collapsed, his military dismantled, and Iraq placed under full foreign occupation. His arrest marked the symbolic end of a war that had already devastated a nation and erased its institutions. Nicolás Maduro, by contrast, was seized while still exercising formal authority over the state. Venezuela's ministries, security forces, and legal structures, however weakened by years of crisis, were still functioning. That distinction matters profoundly. It places the Maduro case in largely uncharted territory, where regime change occurs not after defeat, but mid-rule, and not through invasion, but through arrest. Supporters of the operation argue that this difference reflects progress. They point to the absence of mass civilian casualties, the lack of prolonged military occupation, and the promise of accountability through courts rather than chaos. In this view, the world has learned from Iraq's catastrophic aftermath. replacing brute force with precision, war with warrants, and destruction with detention. Skeptics, however, see a more troubling evolution. To them, this represents not restraint but refinement, a normalization of extraterritorial enforcement that substitutes one form of intervention for another, quieter yet potentially just as destabilizing. The danger, they warn, is that the tools of war have not disappeared. They have simply been repackaged. History offers a sobering reminder. Removing a leader is often the easiest part. Managing what follows has proven far more elusive. The morning after Caracas. The hours following Maduro's capture were defined less by jubilation than by uncertainty. In Caracas, rumors moved faster than official statements. Government ministries fell silent. Senior officials disappeared from public view. Security forces, long accustomed to a centralized command, appeared unsure where authority now resided. Power vacuums, history teaches, rarely remain empty for long. Washington has insisted that it has no intention of governing Venezuela or dictating its political future. Yet intentions alone cannot fill institutional gaps. The absence of a clearly recognized succession mechanism, combined with years of institutional erosion, leaves the country exposed to fragmentation. Whether through internal power struggles, rival claims of legitimacy, or external influence. The shadow of Iraq looms large. There, the removal of a dictator did not produce stability, but a prolonged period of insurgency, sectarian violence, and state collapse. Not because Saddam remained popular, but because the institutions capable of governing in his absence had been dismantled. Venezuela now faces a similar crossroads. Can it transition without imploding? Can legitimacy be rebuilt quickly enough to prevent chaos? Or has the method of Maduro's removal already undermined the credibility of whatever authority follows? These questions will define the country's trajectory long after the headlines fade. Sovereignty in the age of power projection. Few dispute the suffering endured by Venezuelans under Maduro's rule: economic collapse, mass migration, political repression. For many, his arrest feels less like an injustice than a long-delayed reckoning. But international norms are not built for sympathetic cases alone. They exist precisely to prevent power from being exercised arbitrarily. If sovereignty can be overridden whenever allegations reach a certain threshold, the global system becomes dangerously subjective. Today's villain, critics warn, may justify tomorrow's abuse. Small and mid-sized states rely on rules because they lack leverage. When those rules erode, power, not law, becomes the final arbiter. America's moral test. For decades, U.S. influence rested not only on military strength, but on restraint, on the claim that power was exercised within a rules-based order. The Maduro operation challenges that self-image. Defenders argue the old system has failed. International institutions move slowly, are often paralyzed by politics, and rarely deliver accountability for powerful offenders. From this perspective, action becomes a moral necessity when inaction enables crime. Yet moral urgency does not eliminate the risks of precedent. If every major power adopts the same logic, deciding unilaterally which foreign leaders are criminals and acting accordingly, the international order begins to resemble a patchwork of selective enforcement rather than shared norms. A world where no one is untouchable. From Baghdad to Caracas, the message is unmistakable. Political office no longer guarantees immunity. The era when leaders could rely solely on borders and titles for protection may be ending. Whether that is progress or peril remains unresolved. Maduro's capture may be remembered as a turning point, either as the moment accountability finally caught up with authoritarianism, or as the day sovereignty became conditional on power dynamics rather than law. History will judge not only the man who was taken, but the method used to take him. In proving that justice can reach anywhere, the United States has also demonstrated how fragile the lines holding the global order together have become. The question now facing the world is not simply who deserves accountability, but who gets to decide how it is delivered, and at what cost. History doesn't end when a leader falls, it begins to reveal its consequences. The capture of Nicolas Maduro is not just a headline, but a warning about how power, justice, and sovereignty are are being reshaped in real time. What happens next will define not only Venezuela's future, but the rules the world lives by. If you want more deep, honest breakdowns of the moments that quietly change global history, like and subscribe. Because understanding the past is how you stay ahead of what comes next.